Thank you, Director. You may start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back here again. Nice to see you again. As usual, your staff has done a great job in summarizing the financial picture of the department. So what I'd like to do is just go over a couple of brief highlights, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. As has been my practice, I've brought the core members of my team here with me tonight. Certainly sitting with me is Assistant Director for Administration, Wayne Salisbury, and our CFO, Brenda Broder, but I've also brought other members of my exec team as subject matter experts in case there's a particular question you might have. I want the committee to have immediate access to the most accurate answers to your questions. So first, COVID. Many of our operations have returned to pre-pandemic status. Some have not. In-person adult visits for inmates have returned, and we are anticipating allowing inmate children visits to begin possibly as early as next week. We're finalizing some of the logistics because there's a testing requirement for the children that we are facilitating on campus for the inmate children to be able to visit. Where am I? We're still requiring masks to be worn at the facilities for both staff and offenders and anyone entering the facility when social distancing is not possible. And so I think we've done an excellent job during the pandemic, especially if you compare us to our peers nationwide. We did unfortunately lose 2 officers, Lieutenant Russell Freeman, and 3 months ago today, Correctional Officer Richard Karsha, to COVID. And while these losses certainly had an impact on the staff morale, I have to commend the staff at the Department of Corrections for keeping our case numbers as low as possible. And knock on wood, right now our numbers are extremely low. And so that's a very positive development. And as well, our vaccination among staff and among inmates is among the highest in the nation. We've done a very nice job, thanks to our healthcare staff, providing some real education to staff and inmates about why vaccination is a good idea. However, in order to affect this, we've had to do some different methods of management, and one of those things have been spreading the inmates out as much as possible to keep the incidence of COVID from occurring. And what that means is that some housing mods assumed closed when in the FY22 enacted budget have actually remained open in order to keep those inmates as spread out as possible. Right now, we've been looking at whether and which mods can be closed prior to the end of this fiscal year, and we believe that some can. And the FY23 budget does assume that these housing modules can, in fact, be closed, certainly barring some sort of rampant new variant that could set us back. But that's our anticipation. Our next class of correctional officers, Class 85, began last Monday, March 21st. We started with 59 candidates, 56. We're down to 55. We're in the process of recruiting for Class 86, which will take place in FY23. Class 85, we don't anticipate will have any impact on the budget in FY22, but it's estimated that it will have an impact to overtime starting in July. And currently there are 80, possibly slightly more than 80 CO vacancies, which are going to continue to increase through the end of the fiscal year. And so while we're very happy to have the class and look forward to bringing them on, and it'll certainly help, it's not going to fill every one of our CO vacancies. As the Colonel discussed, we feel his pain. Like law enforcement across the country, we are struggling to recruit. We've had some significant challenges to recruitment. We have had core members of our training and recruitment teams attend conferences and other kinds of brainstorming sessions with their peers nationwide to try to improve the way we recruit to bring more people into the fold. But just as the Colonel is experiencing with the state police, the applications are not what they used to be. We had a PT test, the agility test, if you will, a couple of weeks ago for Class 86, And there were about 125 candidates invited that day to come to the PT test. These are 125 people that had already taken the written exam. Of those approximately 125, 28 or 26 candidates showed up, and 8 passed. So we are really scrambling to get as many COs as we can, but it's very difficult. One of the initiatives that we will be talking about down the road is increasing the stipend for officers while they're in our academy. That stipend hasn't budged in many years, and it's not something anyone can live on for the 12 weeks that they're in our academy. In addition to the CO vacancies, I should mention we're also experiencing some staff shortages within nursing, which is a common refrain, particularly during COVID. I know that BHDDH and the Vets Home have had similar experiences and challenges with their healthcare staff. We have continuous recruitment for our nursing staff, but various aspects of being a nurse at the ACI frankly makes that a challenging endeavor to recruit people. They generally can do better financially in another setting, like at a hospital or maybe even a nursing home. And the scheduling of nurses at the ACI is a detriment to recruitment. We recently had a recruitment. We got all the way down to 1 successful candidate out of a very small number before that. And finally, that candidate backed out at the last minute, citing the fact that they didn't want to be scheduled every single weekend. And so we are in contract negotiations, and I know that is on the table. I want to be careful, but I did want to mention that. I'd like to provide an update on the pending litigation regarding the SPMI population. You can see in our budget that we are seeking some funds to help us create a behavioral management unit, or BMU. Our chief legal counsel continues to work closely with the Attorney General's office and remains in mediation discussions with the federal court on these consolidated lawsuits. We've had a nationally recognized consultant. His name is Dr. Joseph Penn. He actually used to work in Rhode Island. He's a forensic psychiatrist, and we've worked with him previously. He was hired utilizing the $750,000 enacted in FY22, visited all of our facilities, and he's working to provide his expertise in correctional procedures related to restrictive housing and the health needs of SPMI inmates in the context of that lawsuit. And we're working to open the pilot BMU, Behavioral Management Unit, at high security, which would require infrastructure changes and security equipment. This is assumed to hopefully be operational this summer. The BMU's purpose would be as an in-between, if you will, or a step down from the more restrictive and intense residential treatment unit, which is mainly geared toward inmates with significant persistent mental illness who struggle to succeed in general population. And general population. So it would be a step down or an in between the RTU and general population for those inmates' needs. Finally, I'd like to address an issue related to correctional industries. As you are aware, Correctional Industries is an internal service fund, and it's required to be self-sustaining. And while it's meant to be a vocational training opportunity for inmates, its funding structure requires it to be run like a business, keeping profits as a priority. Therefore, historically, cash loans have been required throughout the fiscal year to continue the operations. These loans are paid off when receipt of sales is posted, and this has been the practice, as I said, for many years. Due to COVID, like many businesses, sales have declined, and Correctional Industries has been struggling. The process of allowing loans to industries will not be an option in FY23. Therefore, the governor has included a one-time payment to clear the remaining loan balance in FY22. And while sales have increased over the last several months due to pending orders from, for example, the colleges, we do the furniture, the dorm furniture for the Rhode Island State colleges, those will be delivered once the school year is over. The department is outlining changes to this program, and I have a team working on this to offer additional job skills for inmates which are marketable in the community. We received a grant a couple of years ago to study the market, because while I think the intentions are good at Correctional Industries, I think that we've fallen behind in terms of relevance to the actual job market in what we train inmates to do in Correctional Industries. And so we're looking at that, we may be submitting possible changes to the state use law and changing some internal processes, certainly to avoid the request for loans. It's clear to me that the focus of industries needs to be on providing soon-to-be-released inmates with training that's relevant to the job market, with a goal toward employment upon release with businesses willing to hire them. And we've forged a relationship with a young man who works in Iowa who runs a similar program in Iowa's Department of Corrections in terms of outreach to locally owned businesses before the inmate ever is released to try to forge a relationship. It's all well and good to train somebody to do something, but when they get out, if no one's going to hire them, what have we done? So we want to try to forge those relationships before the inmate ever even is looking at release, so that they actually are training for a real job that really exists, that they really can have when they get out. While we work through that, what is essentially a return to correctional industry's core mission, I am concerned for the future of this program as it looks right now, specifically in FY23. And so those are some of the major issues, the highlights, if you will. I'm happy to answer questions about those or anything else that is on your mind.
Thank you, Director. And does any member have any questions? Rep. Bella Wilkinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director, let's go back to correctional industries, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in our briefing, we were told that it currently employs between 70 and 80 inmates.
Correct.
Do we have the capacity to accommodate more, or has it been left at 70 to 80 inmates because of that's where the status is in terms of level of interest?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a combination of level of interest and also staffing. You know, having the sufficient resources to supervise the number of inmates that would be employed in correctional industries.
What are we doing in terms of education for the inmates?
Mm-hmm. So we have a very robust educational program. We have an excellent relationship with many of the colleges. We certainly have a contract with CCRI, the reentry campus. Roger Williams provides some educational programs to us that actually take minimum security inmates off campus to Roger Williams for a program that they run. We have a number of inmates, and I don't want to misspeak and give you the wrong number, so I can send you the number of inmates every year who receive their GED. We have inmates who receive associate's degrees from CCRI, as well as various kinds of certificate programs or vocational kinds of programs through CCRI and others. And so there's also, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. So what I can say, though, is that the educational program is available to inmates, and certainly they take advantage of that. One thing I'm very proud of during COVID, and you heard me talk about this at the other hearing, so I won't belabor it, but I am proud of the fact that we were able to maintain the educational programming even during COVID when the teachers literally couldn't come into the facilities. We found a way to still provide the work, the instruction, and the inmates did their work independently, and it went back out to the instructors. And so it maintained, they didn't lose that momentum that they had in those educational classes.
Do we, and I don't know if this question is coming out of left field, do we offer citizenship classes? Is there an interest in it, or is there a call for it? No?
We don't. I don't know if there's ever been an inquiry about it. That's a good question, but I don't think we currently do.
Okay. And then for the inmates that are enrolled in correctional industries, what is the daily rate? Is it a flat rate, or does it depend on what in particular they're doing?
So there are inmates who are employed throughout the ACI and even off campus, if you will. Everything from ironing clothes within their housing unit to doing laundry to helping in the kitchen to emptying my wastebasket in the morning and so forth. Grounds maintenance, everything, as well as those that are actually, quote, employed in correctional industries. And so the benefit of having those jobs is twofold. One, they are entitled to time off sentence per statute for something called industrial time, and it's 2 or 3 days a month. I think it's 2. And then in terms of wages, that is also set by statute, and it's up to $3 a day. And it's not a lot. I'd like it to be more. It's actually, believe it or not, we are not an outlier nationwide. We're one of the higher paid DOCs, but I think it should be higher than that. And it depends on the job. It depends on the skill level of the job and the longevity in the job for an inmate. So there's a way to work your way up, if you will, to $3 a day. But that's set by statute, so that statute would have to be changed for us to increase it.
And do the inmates have an opportunity to send any of their accrued wages to their families?
Absolutely. So there is an inmate account system at the ACI. Every inmate at the ACI has 2 accounts. It's not a bank, but they have 2 accounts. One, which we refer to as the active account, and that's the money that the inmate can use for commissary purchases, for court fees, for really whatever they want, to include sending out money to their family members. That's the account that a family member or friend, someone on their visiting list, can come into inmate accounts and deposit money into that account for the inmate's use. The other account is called, for lack of a better term, the frozen account. And that's an account created by statute that 25% of all deposits and earnings of an inmate go into that account, and that account is meant for their release. And so it's meant to be kind of a little nest egg, if you will, for renting an apartment or transportation or getting yourself settled in some way upon release. That account used to max out at $500. It now maxes out, there was a change in the statute some years ago, it maxes out at $1,000. And so the only reason an inmate can touch that money is if they want to use it to file a lawsuit. But other than that, it's for their release.
My final question, is there any opportunity for the inmates to be trained in landscaping or hardscaping or culinary arts?
So we do have inmates who work doing landscaping work, and then we also certainly, all of our inmate kitchens, all of our facility kitchens are the food is prepared by inmates. I spent some time a month or 2 ago in the early morning at medium security, just watching the operation, watching how these inmates put together breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the entire population at medium security. It's almost 800 inmates. It's very, very impressive. We've actually had people who, in their prior to being incarcerated, worked in the restaurant industry, and that's the job that they gravitate to when they became incarcerated. We are currently working with, I believe it's URI, to bring in a program. It's not strictly a culinary program, it's more of a dietary program, but there are corrections departments that do have more robust culinary programs, and that's something that along with looking at the relevancy of our training to the job market, that's one of the areas that we've been looking at.
So with regards to the nearly $2 million deficit since 2016, how quickly are you getting paid, for lack of a better term, from other state departments that might be utilizing the correctional industries, for instance, in painting or carpentry or anything of that nature?
I'm going to defer that to the CFO.
Sure.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we don't get paid until the project is completed. We are in discussions currently with Rhode Island College to accept some furniture that we've had in storage since February. They originally thought they needed it in February and decided that they now need it in June. So this is like $1 million project that we can't get funds for until the equipment is delivered. So we're trying to work with them and try to change our process to maybe get 25% upfront costs or just pay for the materials, which will help correctional industries in their deficit.
So you're experiencing the same frustrations that many of our small businesses do, unfortunately, when they do business with the state.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, please let us know if there's anything we can do to kind of nudge people for you, all right?
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Because we're not on a one-way street. Thank you very much for your information today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rep.
Thank you, Rep. Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to spending on one question that Red Bella Wilkinson made it. When she was referring to the correctional industries, and the slide 22 is referring to 70 to 80 inmates who has the opportunity to work inside the facility. My question to you is, are those 70 to 80 inmates are rotated, or they are the same for a long period of the time? Thinking based on the population and the small numbers of inmates that work, just think about how things works.
So they don't really rotate, to be perfectly honest. They the time and effort that goes into training an inmate to perform a certain kind of function, a carpentry endeavor, or building the furniture, that kind of thing, the auto shop, we'd like to hang on to that trained person, so there's not a whole lot of turnover. I frankly think that is that's a fact of life, and I understand why that is, but I'd like to see us move to a dynamic where inmates who are closer to being released are the ones cycling into industries. I understand the appeal and frankly necessity of having a well-trained inmate and who can help train the other inmates, and I get that and the consistency that gets you. But if that inmate is serving a 40-year sentence or a life sentence, it wasn't really the goal of the program as much as the inmate who's maybe getting out in 5 years. And so that is one of the factors. As I said, I have a team looking at correctional industries as a whole, and how do we get back to the roots of what that program is meant to be.
Okay. And the perfect world would be awesome to have more opportunity for all the inmates, because it's part of the healing process inside the facility. So I left
agree.
that to you. Now, when I had the great opportunity to go for a tour into 2 or 3 facilities, I didn't have any chance to go into the female buildings or facilities. And I didn't have a chance to make any questions regarding to the females. So can you tell me what kind of programs you have based on the females' needs and abilities? I know you offering a educational opportunity for many those inmates who express the interest, but I didn't have a chance to speak with you in regard of the female programming.
Thank you for that question, Rep. I'm the first female director of corrections in Rhode Island. And so this is an issue that's very close to my heart, whether it's mentoring an up-and-coming executive on my staff or helping to provide other women to succeed in some way. It includes a real desire to see female inmates succeed upon release. Female inmates have much different kinds of challenges upon release. I think in many ways bigger challenges than male inmates when they're released. And so I'm very motivated to do what I can do to provide opportunities for them to succeed, to really stand on their own 2 feet when they're released. And I'm super excited about the fact that we are bringing what is possibly, I believe, the first correctional industries to the women's facility in Rhode Island. We've engaged with a program called Polaris. They're a nonprofit, and they are working with DLT to bring an advanced manufacturing program to the women's facility. It has a classroom component to it, and it also has a hands-on manufacturing component to it. And through their partnership with DLT, they are prepared to be able to offer jobs to at least a portion of the women who will engage in that program upon release. So they're doing exactly what I would like to do for all the inmates. But I'm very excited because women have never really had that opportunity at the ACI. That's in addition to all of the other programs that they have there. There's a long list of programs that go on at the ACI. They don't all go on at the same time, but I can tell you that currently the programs that are running right now include things like a barber apprenticeship, which is available at the women's facility. Certainly the college classes that I talked about, CBD, that's CBD. No, that's not what I meant to say. Wow, CBT, how you doing? It's all that talk about adult use marijuana got me off on the track. CBT programs, and so things like substance abuse treatment, sex offender treatment, reentry programs, victim impact, women's health and nutrition, and so on. And so there's a lot of programs available to the women that I'm really proud of.
Director Coy, can you repeat the name of the program partnering with the Department of Labor and Training?
It's Polaris.
Polaris?
Polaris, like
Polaris.
polar with an
Yeah.
IS at the
Okay.
end.
And the Polaris program is subsidized by DLT, is not coming from your budget?
It's not coming from our budget. They received a grant and they're working with DLT on it. We're just the site.
Okay. Now, moving to something that is very painful for the state and difficult for many departments. When you talk about the correctional officer training academy, which is difficult for you to recruit and retain correctional officers to serve into the population. You mentioned that you have retained so far for this training year the 55 members, right? Correct?
Yes.
Do you have the diversity of that group, as I asked the state police?
I do, and you have to forgive me because we've lost two only in like the last 2 days, and so these numbers are not going to be pinpoint accurate because they're based on the larger number. But we are at about 87% diversity. When we started the class a week ago Monday, there were 7 females, 2 were Hispanic or Latina, 5 were white. There were 48 males, 1 Asian, 11 African American, 9 Latino or Hispanic, and 25 white. So the diversity of this class is actually very good.
I'm so proud. I never see
too.
the diversity at that level, especially including females to females.
Very
I
excited to
guess.
see the females.
Yeah. Yes, very, very excited. So
I go to the
thank you.
PT test and cheer the females on.
And we posed the same question I did to the state police, talking about preview the training class to candidates. How your department engage in make the training as a great opportunity it is something that you can tell me what is the plan, what resources you put it together as a department director?
Sure. I'd like to ask Assistant Director Salisbury to answer that. He oversees the training academy.
Yes, Representative Diaz, thank you for the question. The recruitment and retention issues that we have are very similar to the state police. And as Colonel Manning testified to, they started a mentorship program in 2019. Just before that, we started a program with an orientation program and creating videos online in regards to our physical agility test, our training academy, and the standards of conduct during that training academy, along with candidate handbooks that would assist them with the written examination and the oral interview panels. Subsequently, we have held, in essence, orientation sessions for candidates that are interested in the correctional officer profession. We haven't taken it to the length of where the state police have with the mentoring program because it's a little bit more difficult and challenging for us to bring individual candidates inside of secure institutions and walk them around amongst the population. But we have taken great strides and efforts in our recruitment efforts and working with our National Guard counterparts, going out to colleges, high schools and the alike, posting bulletin boards out in the communities, going out to Progressive Latino, public outreach with the minority community, especially through our public information officer, J.M. Ventura, and making sure that we are successful in bringing folks in. Unfortunately, because I think with COVID, the lack of glamour of working inside of a correctional institution and the public sentiment towards law enforcement in the last couple of years, we have not been able to recruit the numbers that we need to recruit, which has been very unfortunate. I think the state police have been fortunate with 1,000 numbers that they had and only getting 600 basically to apply and only 400 to show up. Unfortunately, we are in a position where we have a rolling, continuous recruitment, and it's a very slow roll to get the numbers to where we need to get them. In fact, this class here, with the 56 that we started with on the 21st, was probably a good 6 to 7 months of continuous recruitment, giving people various opportunities to retake the physical agility exam. Historically, in the past, if somebody came and took the physical agility exam after they took the written phase and they failed, the process would end. We have basically had to shift our paradigm and say, okay, you took the written exam, that written exam is good for a year now, you'll have multiple opportunities to take that physical agility exam, rather than having to reapply and pay a $25 fee. So we've had people that have come and taken that physical agility test 2-4 times, and trying to get into the door and pursue their career. So it's very difficult and very challenging for us. We're consistently re-evaluating what we need to do to bring people in. So hopefully we're going to be successful here.
Mr. Chairman, last question. My sincere condolences to the correctional officers in the facility for losing 2 officers recently.
Thank you.
And think about how difficult it is for some correctional officer to serving, because they have family, they have personal life, and I commend all of them to serving and protecting inmates and do what work they do. So under my own experience, I work for the mental health department, and I remember one Christmas that I worked 32 hours straight. I couldn't see my kids, I couldn't celebrate Christmas, and I know it's the case of many honorable servants in the state of Rhode Island, including the correctional officer. I know you and the department and the correctional officers union and all of them working together to see how we can address the overtime. Things that I always mention in Finance Committee, not just for the money, because we are now like a dog watch about money for the state, but also for the mental health of the correctional officers, for those services they do to their work to inmates for so many reasons. So how the 32 hours work, I want to hear from you, because I know it's voluntarily, they can choose that, but I know that sometimes you have to stay there. Right. Because there's nobody to replace you. Right. And as you remember, in the city of Providence, Mayor Jorge Lorza worked hard to really have defined the situation with the fire department, who went through the same situation. Mm-hmm. I want to hear from you, your plan, and also the union, how they perceive we can solve or helping with this.
Certainly.
So thank you.
Thank you, Rep. So in answer to your question, there are 3 shifts of corrections officers that work in the facilities, 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. In order to fill a post, and we have to keep posts filled, we can, certainly fewer posts at night as operations wind down, and there are fewer people coming in and out obviously during the night. But posts have to be filled. You can't just lock the door and tell everyone you'll see them in the morning and come back. So obviously those posts have to be filled. Superiors can order an officer to work 1 shift past his regular shift. So if the officer works 7 to 3 and we're short 3 to 11, they can be ordered to work 3 to 11. It's involuntary, and it's nothing that anyone likes, because it does interfere with their life. And having a life on the outside is key, I think, to the officer's mental health. It's an extraordinarily stressful job, and they handle it extremely well. However, by contract with the Rhode Island Brotherhood of Correctional Officers in the state of Rhode Island, they may elect to work as many as 4 shifts, so 32 hours. And so what that means is if they work 7 to 3, that's their regular shift, that's straight time. If they elect to take the next shift as overtime, that's time and a half. Now they're working 11 at night till 7 in the morning, that's double time. And now they've come all the way around to their regular shift, it's double time. And I can't imagine any sort of endeavor that you can really be at your best after being awake for that many hours in a row. I think that it's frankly, the contract used to allow for 5 shifts, and now it allows for 4, and we are in contract negotiations. That said, and I know President Ferruccio is sitting behind me, and I know at least one thing he would say if he was sitting here, and I have to, at this moment in time, somewhat agree with him, that right now, we need it. That if you're willing, Rep Diaz, to work that quad, that's allowing Rep Wilkinson to go home. And so that might be preferable. And because of our staffing challenges right now, it's almost a necessary evil. I still want to find a way out of it. I don't think it's safe. I think we've been extremely fortunate, and I think it's a credit to the professionalism of the correctional officers that nothing horrible has happened. But I don't like to bank on luck. I'd rather be smart about it. And so it's a challenge, and I know that it's being discussed at the bargaining table now.
Thank you so much for,
Thank you.
for everything.
Thank you, Chairman Diaz. Do you have a question? Rep. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, could we talk a little bit about the training school, please?
The training school is under the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, not part of the DOC, but sure. Which means I don't know a whole lot about the training school.
Okay. What I wanted to find out was, at one time, there was an issue where the corrections officers that were at the ACI had not been trained in takedown procedures of youth, and it was creating a little bit of a problem, or an anticipated problem, if the training school needed backup. And I was wondering if that issue is totally resolved. That came up my first term here. So I was just wondering.
Can I ask when that was? What,
2016.
Okay.
Okay.
So I frankly, I had no familiarity of this issue. I wasn't the director then, and
Right.
I was unaware of it. I can tell you that we don't back up the training school. If the training school has an issue, we don't. That's just not what we do.
Okay.
So it's really
So
just not an issue.
it's a non-issue. Good.
Non-issue.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Now, Director, my questions, and I know time is of the essence, and I think we have other folks here who are going to present, and then other folks who are going to actually give testimony. If I can go back to the overtime issue, it's significantly high, and that's just a comment that I'm saying. But I think in terms of the absenteeism, what are you guys doing to actually curb that, if anything?
Right. So the Department of Corrections has an absenteeism tracking program that is extremely comprehensive, and frankly, I think more comprehensive and elaborate than any other state agency. That said, despite the effort and a lot of hard work by a lot of people, it doesn't really work, and I can explain why. So I do want to say, by way of caution, that I am not sitting here saying that all sick time use is sick time abuse. There's legitimate use of sick time. And neither am I going to assert that correctional officers all abuse their sick time and no one else abuses their sick time but correctional officers. That's not what I'm about to say. The reality, however, is that if I call out sick, the state pays me for my sick day, and that's that. If a correctional officer calls out sick, we pay that correctional officer for his sick day, and we also have to backfill that correctional officer on overtime. And so that's where the money is. And so that's why there was a focus on any abuse of sick time by staff who get backfilled on overtime. And so that's why there was that focus there. We took a good look at the program, and after a long time, and I mean back to years before A.T. Wall retired, we've been talking about making these changes. We conferred with the union and made some what we thought were very practical, doable, attainable changes to our absenteeism program that would give it a little more teeth, and make it more of a deterrent to those who would abuse their sick time, and to really just try to change the culture in I won't even limit it to the Department of Corrections, but into maybe state government, where you know, if I'm about to retire, I'm going to, quote, burn up my sick time before I retire, and that's, you know, and that really results in a huge expenditure for the Department of Corrections, millions and millions of dollars every year. And so we proposed those changes. The union exercised its right to file an unfair labor practice action. We litigated in front of the State Labor Relations Board. The department lost, and we are currently appealing it to the Rhode Island Superior Court. And so until that's decided, we've been unable really to move forward with a lot of the changes that we want to make. And I will caution you, Mr. Chair, that even the changes that we wanted to make would not result in a heap of money right there in the first fiscal year. It's a process because it's related to the disciplinary process, which takes time and has various steps of grievance and arbitration. But we really felt like if we never start, we'll never start. So even though we knew it was going to take a while, we wanted to at least get that ball rolling. We've had to wait now because of the litigation.
So the lawsuit then that you guys just went through is because of that absenteeism
Yes.
issue? Okay, good to know. Good to know. And then moving on to the healthcare staffing. So I'm assuming that all is well when folks are getting ready to be sort of discharged. So how well are we doing getting folks, you know, the types of services they need, in this case, let's say Medicaid, getting them on Medicaid so when they do get out, and could you?
So as you know, we recently brought our discharge planning services in-house rather than contracting out. We had the experience, and then it was validated by a study done by the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, that contracts with largely nonprofit agencies did not provide us the level of enough of a robust discharge planning program because of the high rate of turnover in those positions in those agencies, usually due to their struggle for funding. And so we followed Harvard Kennedy's advice and brought those positions in-house as state employees, and we've created a discharge planning unit, transitional services unit, which assists inmates with re-entering inmates with any number of re-entering issues: jobs, housing, medicine, mental health care, medical care. One of those being re-enrolling inmates in Medicaid. And that has been a mighty struggle. I think right now we're in a place where we're holding our own. We're doing better than had been in making sure that inmates have those resources upon release. I know that there's some legislation under discussion that might even make that easier, and we've been in conversations with some members of the Senate on that that would help do some things that they've done in other states to allow inmates to sort of remain on Medicaid while they're incarcerated, so that transition isn't as difficult when they're released. But it's definitely a priority.
Thank you. And I'm just going to move along, right along with some questions. I have a lot of questions, but I know there's folks here, waiting to get on. But so just going back to Rep. Velowitz concern about the correction industries. I mean, what are we going to do? Because the state is basically on the hook for that money. I mean, we say loan or whatever that is, but it's really not a loan because the state backs it up anyway. So we're going to, what can be done to actually address
Sure.
that issue?
One of the aspects is what's called the state use law. And under the state use law, any state agency looking to purchase furniture or have work done must come to us first, and before they can go to WB Mason or what have you. By and large, they don't. It's pretty much a universally ignored statute. We'd like to take a look at that, and that's part of the work that my team is looking at on that is not just, maybe making it more attractive for other state agencies to utilize us, but also what other options are there? I mean, I cited Iowa. Iowa has a much different dynamic where they are allowed to sell items manufactured in their correctional industries to members of the public. We can't do that. Things like that. And so we're exploring different avenues statutorily, but also in terms of the program itself on how to be, competitive, really. I mean, there's a reason why a state agency will buy that chair from WB Mason rather than us. It's cheaper. Our head of correctional industries, and he's right, will tell you that our chair will last a lot longer. But if you only have $200 to spend, my $400 chair isn't going to do anything for you. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at to we need to improve the program. It needs to be, I think the skills that we're teaching inmates are valuable for keeping them busy and for teaching them how to deal with a workplace, showing up to work on time, dealing with coworkers and those kind of soft skills. But I think that the industries themselves really need to be looked at and modernized. And so those are a lot of, it's a big lift. And so we're, as I said, I have literally a team of people looking at this and working on this daily to try to make it, I don't want to be the only correctional facility in the country that doesn't have an industries.
Well, I mean, I think to borrow, Chairwoman Diaz's word, so if there is anything that we can do or I can do to actually sort of help in that process of getting more state agency to buy into the program, perhaps they, maybe tell them how this would help the inmate. I mean, it's helping them get a skill that when they do get out. But most of all, I think gets it off the hook of paying this constant money where, state are actually buying stuff outside of the system when they actually have a fairly good system within the system that they can buy stuff from.
Right. Thank you.
That's all my question, Director, and I think, thank you guys for coming out. And I see that Ferrucci's back there. He's not on the list to testify, though, but he's there. He's got a present. So thank you very much, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Thanks.
So Eddie, whenever you're ready, you may, hit the mic, and so you can get going where you need to be. The red button,
The push?
Yeah,
Hello?
you got it.
All right, awesome. Thank you for your time. My name is Brandon Robinson. I'm the new community organizer for ending solitary confinement. My goal here today is to paint the picture of the mind frame of an individual in solitary confinement. Now, there are 8,760 hours in a year. Imagine you were locked inside your bathroom for 8,395 of those hours. What would you do? How would you pass the time? No matter how hard you try to open the door, it won't open. No matter how long you cry, it won't open. No matter how much you pray or wish it was a dream, the door still is locked. What would you do? How would you feel? How would you cope mentally, emotionally, and physically? It would be hard, right? Now imagine as you're trying to stay strong, you hear the screams of torture and agony from other inmates who came with mental issues or developmental issues while inside, or are fighting to hold on to their sanity as you would be too in the same circumstances. Imagine out of those 8,760 hours in your bathroom, you are allowed only 1 hour each day to step out to your kitchen for a total of 360 hours per year. In this hour, out of your bathroom, you were allowed limited, if any, access to educational programming, medical treatment, mental health treatment, or employment opportunities. All you're allowed to do is socialize with other inmates who have mental health issues or who have lost their grip on reality. This is what it's like to be locked up in solitary confinement, and this is what I have experienced myself or witnessed other inmates experience, as I served 1 year in solitary confinement. And when you return back to your bathroom/cell, you're only allowed limited books, magazines, food, hygiene, and no TV to pass the time. Many individuals continue to experience these conditions to this day for weeks and months and years. Many of these problems the DOC should take responsibility for and could improve by adopting different policies with no additional money. For example, they do not need to force everyone in segregation to be kicked out of educational classes and programs. There are some classes people could stay in while in seg, but people are kicked out just to be punished. They could allow people to do visits over the phone, and perhaps most importantly, they could stop sending people to solitary confinement for petty infractions. For example, I've seen people get 10 days in seg for taking things out of the shower because they was hungry. I've seen people get 5 days in seg for not tucking in their shirt. And I've even once seen somebody get 30 days in segregation for using somebody else's pen to call their family just because they didn't have no money on their phone. In conclusion, the DOC could save the state money and reduce the inhumane conditions just by teaching the staff to treat people as humans. These types of reforms have been proven to save other states money and reduce violence in their prisons. At the same time, the DOC is accountable to this committee. This committee decides what to fund and how the DOC spends that money. And I ask today that this committee take responsibility for ending the torture in Rhode Island's prisons by meeting with our coalition to discuss the Restricted Housing Act. Thank you for your time and this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Brandon, for testifying and for sharing your story. So, gentlemen, do you want Haley to go next, or who, you know?
I'll go next. My name is Joe Benton. I am currently a minister at Beloved Tabernacle, 628 Union Avenue in Providence, directly across the street from Romano's Funeral Home. The purpose of me being here basically is that I spent a substantial amount of time incarcerated, and not only that, I experienced some substantial time in segregation. And my concern is the mental deterioration that happens as a result of being confined in that environment. I was very disappointed, as a matter of fact, that so little money is contributed to mental health concerns. It's just a minute amount. And the sad part is that most of these people that suffer from this mental health conditions, such as myself, I'm getting therapy, they are laying all over my community and nobody cares. And my job is to address those that have broken hearts, those that are lost, those that are in need of spiritual services, food, clothing. A couple of months ago, Wilson Street, there was an encampment there. A number of formerly incarcerated people were sleeping in the most inhumane conditions because they weren't able to get employment, they weren't able to get housing, and it was a shame. And we tried desperately to get them into some hotels, which we eventually did, but it's only a temporary, it's like putting a Band-Aid over a hemorrhage. But I think, Reps, you all know too well the damage that's being done in that Department of Corrections. They sit here and paint this glorious picture. And if this body has oversight I think that they should take a more of an active role. I don't want to bring this issue up, but I got to tell you, I went downtown and I looked up, and in fact, I shouldn't even say this because it's perfectly legitimate to get a contribution. But it's a sad day when contributions are passed out and they can come in here and paint a rosary story for you, and you just look the other way. At some point, if you have oversight, two things has to happen. And that's stop taking their money. And the other thing, I don't think that's appropriate. And I shouldn't even have this conversation because I feel that as a result of what happens with that, they think they can walk in here and be treated with kid gloves. And I'm one of those people that I'm straightforward. I try to speak, but I tell the truth. Because the bishop has commissioned me to do most of the street ministry, and all I see is just tragedy all over South Providence. And this is not just a black and white issue, I mean a black issue, black and brown. We have white brothers that are in the street begging for money. It's sad to see the type of community that we're developing. Now, I know everybody's living pretty good, but those people in the street, formerly incarcerated, locked up in segregation, they're damaged. And if I could hug every last one of them, I would, because they're left to what resources? And that's something that you guys should think about. I deal with it, and I'll continue to deal with it. But it's not just something that just I can take care of. We need your help. And when you go in that prison, go to the segregation area. There's a place in the back of the hospital, and I think you've seen it, where the light stays on 24 hours a day. That's like Guantanamo Bay. That will break you emotionally, mentally. That would destroy you. And when you come out here, everybody has an expectation that you will conduct yourself like a model citizen. It's not going to happen. I needed therapy, and I'm still in therapy after almost 20 years. So that's all I have to say. I'm not going to sit here and try to paint this thing. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to give it to you the way it is. And God bless you, and thank you very much, Rep. Wilkerson, Rep. Diaz, Rep. Barrows, and certainly Rep. Hall. God bless you. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you for your testimony. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your time, for staying so late. I usually try to speak very quickly. I do have some more points that I would like to make, and I hope you'll entertain them. We did have the challenge over the last several years where we weren't able to testify in front of this committee. So I'd like to address some things that have happened over the last several years and then get to some more current things, but I will still try to be brief. In the last two budgets, there were some significant decisions made about how to invest funds to try to help people coming out of prison. A lot of us here from all sides have this similar goals, and we often say the challenge is we don't have the funds. If there were just money, we could solve these problems. And there's very little money that the state that comes out of the Rhode Island budget to try to help people coming out of prison. So these were unique funds. And we've debated these funds in relation to discharge planning for several years. Many of you I've spoken to individually on this issue. So in the FY21 budget, a decision was made to fund Department of Corrections state positions with the goal of trying to help people coming out of prison. There was about $630,000 put into 7 discharge planning positions and 1 DLT position. No formerly incarcerated people were asked about about these decisions. Many of the agencies that provide services to formerly people coming out of prison were not asked about these decisions. In the FY21 budget, after years of debate, the decision was made with no public comment. And actually, your committee made a specific decision that these positions should not be hired. And if I could read briefly from the FY21 sub A supporting documents, they said that H7171 substitute A restores $0.3 million for contracted services for the next 6 months. The Department of Corrections ignored that decision by your committee, did not hire those contracted services, and went ahead with their plan. I know that you are in a very difficult position of oversight, but I guess my question would be, what really is what is the role of this committee if in the unique situations when you make a specific decision, it is ignored? And to the substance of that decision, once again, no formerly incarcerated people were asked about how that money could be best spent. We did a survey, and we found that from a 3-to-1 margin, people would prioritize spending the money on actual services instead of someone to go into the prison and ask them what help they would want when they got out, actually funding those services. Our agency, we have a budget of about a little over $1 million a year. We house about 70 people at a time. We get by, we do a lot with very little. And so I guess our point would be that the money really needs to be spent in the best way possible. And often the referral, as it was made today, is that the decision about how that money was spent followed a Harvard report that was authored in 2017. I just want to point out that the report basically just said if you pay people more, they'll stay longer. They'll have less turnover. It's not a particularly insightful conclusion, and that could have been done in any sort of allocation, whether it be state positions, nonprofit positions. The larger point, I think, is that it doesn't make sense to us that the DOC is continued to look, that we continue to look to the DOC to be the agency that is empowered and funded to try to help people coming out of prison. The DOC has a specialized purpose, which is custody and control. And I've seen a lot of people at that agency that do a good job at custody and control. But it is not their priority, it is not their background, their experience, their sensitivity to focus on helping people coming home from prison. The second point I wanted to make is that the Department of Corrections frequently makes the point that their role is just to operate the facility. They don't choose who goes in there. And we have to, they can't have a no turned away policy, right? But right now, the Department of Corrections continues to make decisions unilaterally, as far as I can tell, to hold people in prison. There are a number of people who have come up in front of the parole board who have been granted parole, many of them as a result of Mario's Law, which you all passed recently, who have been denied release by the Department of Corrections. After speaking with the attorney at ACLU who's been working on this case, my understanding is that most recently the judiciary reprimanded the Department of Corrections for these decisions and forced them to release one individual, that the Attorney General's office has not made a statement to get involved in this decision, and that it is a decision by the Department of Corrections to keep these men in the ACI for a significant amount of time longer than they need to be. This has financial implications. Obviously, we're all paying for these men to sit in prison when they don't need to be there. And so the last point I'd like to make is just to ask this committee, as has been done by those to my right, to please engage seriously on some of these important issues, on the issue of solitary confinement, on the issue of the women's prison, which Senator Coleman has started a commission in the Senate to discuss, focusing on how we can reduce the number of women in prison. I think that there are creative solutions. You all may not have gotten access to the Department of Corrections recommended budget. which was given to the governor before the governor released his version of that, but they actually recommended closing minimum security. And last year, I think they recommended closing women's. So they're apparently very open to some creative solutions about how money could be spent, and we think those recommendations should be taken seriously. We think there is the opportunity to close facilities like Medium 2 was closed, and that money could be better spent and people could be treated more humanely with alternatives to incarceration. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nick. Haley?
I'm just going to angle this. Good evening, honorable members of the committee. My name is Haley McKee. I am also part of the effort working to stop solitary confinement in Rhode Island. And I just wanted to touch on something that I've heard in this committee tonight. And I wasn't planning on talking about COVID, but I heard COVID mentioned in this committee, and I just wanted to point out that it wasn't just correctional officers' lives who were lost. And as a matter of fact, I had heard, I believe it was the director who had said, we did our best to try to keep them away from the inmates. And we're not inmates. We're people who are formerly incarcerated or people who are incarcerated. It's person-centered language. We're not stock as we're listed on DOC website. We're not, we're not inmates. We're people. And it was, sad for me to hear that the effort was to keep the staff away from the inmates or people who were incarcerated when, in fact, the people who were incarcerated who passed were sentenced in the men's maximum medium facilities, and there was nobody in and out of those buildings. So unless you were at men's intake or women, there was no coming or going. There was only one way for that virus to enter those buildings. And that's not with assigning blame. I also want to mention that we as a community banded together, comprised mostly of formerly incarcerated people, and advocated a little bit radically, but we got the job done to make sure that not only the people who were incarcerated, but also the correctional officers were prioritized on that vaccination schedule, and that they got first dibs because we realized that they met the requirements for it. So when that virus was ripping through men's max in particular without walls, and just bars, and these people were defenseless, and that would be staff and people who are incarcerated. I just want to draw attention to the fact that the other people's deaths weren't mentioned in this committee hearing tonight, and I just find something really unsettling about that. And it was formerly incarcerated people who offered the solutions to get people access to that vaccination shortly thereafter. Unfortunately, it was just a little bit too late for some folks. So just going to touch really quickly on my experience. So I am formerly incarcerated. I was released a few years ago. I did a pretty lengthy stint in the women's facility. And Rep. Diaz, I heard you had questions about what that looks like. I'm in this building all the time, and I'm always happy to answer them. I don't see what worked for me, and granted, I'm just one person, but I don't see what worked for me not behind the walls, but what led where I didn't recidivate, where I was able to maintain recovery and, rack up some college degrees, find meaningful work, build a healthy network, reestablish a relationship with my family. I think that the moment that turned things around for me when I was incarcerated was when I met a woman named Michelle Harder. She was a peer at the time who was coming into the prison and working from Anchor Recovery Community Center. And I got to talking to this woman about a year after I became incarcerated. And it was a turning point for me where it just kind of opened my eyes. And I saw a woman who had shared similar life experiences as I did. And I realized that that's what I wanted to do when I got home. And it wasn't anything, and whatever they're depicting is a picture of what things look like behind the walls. There's one college class in the women's facility a year that comes around for 25 people. That's false, right? The programming, the things that the Department of Correction is prioritizing in the budget that they feel like we need it couldn't be further from the truth. So anyhow, back to Michelle Harder. I knew when I was released from prison, I could go to Anchor Recovery as a landing space. When I was there, people said you should go to school for psychology. I ended up going to school for psychology. I met my recovery network. I work in recovery. Nowadays, I work in research, studying opioids and overdose before I head over here for the afternoons and work on policy reform. So, it's just concerning to me when I hear things about how prison wages are acceptable, that $1 to $3 a day, you have to pay for your own soap, which the market on commissary in the prisons behind the walls, your own sanitary supplies for women, right? Ritz crackers are probably about $4 a box. So, prison industries, when I was at Rhode Island College before I graduated, I was stunned to see the truck pull up with people in prison clothes. And I didn't know at the time what that was, but I sensed something was up because in women's facility, you don't leave the building. I would hate to see that the state is making a profit off of, I'm not going to say what it is, but you know, $1 to $3 a day, that's not something that should be allowed. And granted, I don't blame these men for getting out of their cells during the day. And one more point, and I think that you've heard kind of a theme here. I got thrown into solitary confinement for my drug detox. So I was there a few years ago when they didn't have access to medically assisted recovery medications such as Suboxone, methadone, or naltrexone. So their answer to it, like many things that happen behind those walls, is let's put this person in solitary confinement. For not very good reasons oftentimes. Somebody gets upset because they ran out of their favorite cereal in the chow line, because we're animals, we eat chow, right? And it's an important topic. So if they're looking, you know, if you're talking about, and it's embarrassing to read in the paper that 10 of your 30 highest paid employees in the state are working in corrections, and that was 29 or 39 of them actually made over $100,000 in overtime alone in one given year. And we're proposing a solution to close down a high facility center that they're looking at expanding. It costs $200,000 per year per person who's incarcerated in those torturous conditions. So we have answers. Other states are figuring it out. They're shutting down these facilities. They're capping the amount of time. And meanwhile, my friends are serving months, if not years, in these horrendous conditions. That it should not be acceptable in our society. So, you know, I'm going to echo what Nick and Joe and Brandon have spoken about, that this issue of confinement, and it is solitary confinement. So if they deny that, they call it administrative disciplinary confinement. It's all the same. It's people in a box by themselves for outrageously long periods of time, where they do end up, if, you know, things happen in those spaces. So any extra consideration you can give to that issue in particular would be most welcome and greatly appreciated. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Haley. And again, thank you for all of you folks who, you know, coming out, testifying, and sharing your personal stories. Thank you.
Rep. Barrows, can I say something in closing? They should spend money on the mold that's also in those buildings, especially in Maximum. And and that's a horrible condition for that place to be in. There's a legitimate mold, and so people are in a position where they can't get escape from the mold, and money should be geared in that direction.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Thank you. Anybody has a question for? Go ahead, Rep. Wilkinson.
Haley, thank you for your testimony. Actually, to all four of you, thank you for your testimony tonight. Could you tell me what is the best practice if solitary confinement was not abolished? What is the best practice in terms of capping the amount of time?
It's funny that you ask that, Representative, because we have the suggested time would be 15 days. That's the number according to the United Nations, that anything exceeding that is not in line with humane treatment of people. And you know, like I really think that in most cases where people are put into confinement, even if it's for a week, they don't necessarily need to be there. And it's from what I've observed. So in 19 and a half months that I was in women's maximum security prison, I saw 2 fights, and it was in the whole span of time. So 2 violent incidents in the time that I was in women's prison, and that's just to give you an idea. But you know, there's also cells downstairs for solitary confinement that were often quite occupied, and it's more for other just unneeded reasons from what I've seen.
And if one of the prisoners has been put into solitary confinement and they're known to have a form of mental illness, are they checked on with more frequency? Is a psychiatrist or a psychologist sent in there on a daily or at least a weekly basis to do a reading of the person's mental health?
Now, that's one of the concerns that I have that's also in the legislation, because we need a step-down program where they have access to therapeutic intervention. It is absolutely essential. there are people who literally harm themselves because they're overwhelmed by being locked up like that. So at each step, they should have that intervention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Ho.
I thank you, Mr. Benton. I've known you for years. You're a very, very good gentleman. I mean, I consider you a brother. And when you say something, I listen. Nick, you couldn't have a better person or mentor to have. And to people who are watching, just because you may be incarcerated doesn't mean you're worthless. I live it. I stay in the streets. But I see people for who they are. There's nobody that's perfect in life. And I say that to you, Mr. Ben, because I learned a lot from you. From being, when you came out and you had the little hot dog stand there and you turn yourself right around. And now you're advocating for people where you could just turn around and not advocate for anybody else and say, well, I did it, you can do it. And I say that to the people who are watching this evening. People have worth. They're worth something. And what you're advocating for is right. They're not animals. They're not someone to be cast away. There were difficulties in their lives. And I've been a policeman 34 years, and I've seen it. And I still see it. And I understand when I look at Trinity Square, and I go through there, and I see my friends that I went to school with that are out. It's hurtful. Yes, so I thank you for advocating, and I will be an advocate as long as I'm here, because you're worth something. We're all worth something. And it really hurts me to see that you're advocating for just basics, to say, hey, it's not right. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, because it really hurts my heart. So
Everybody's God somebody.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, all of you, for your touching testimony, but especially to Haley to bring a female experience into the conversation. It has been a very mind change to her from your own personal experience. So I want to thank you for that, and looking forward to learn more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So I think you guys are all set. We have the next round, which is I got Leonard Jefferson, Sherry Cruz, and Crystal Barubi.
Rep, that hot dog stand paid my way through college. My mama raised me.
All right.
No, I'll just, oops. Ladies, gentlemen, you guys just pick who to start and go right ahead.
Okay, my name is Leonard Jefferson. My little expertise in this matter is that I was incarcerated from 1973 till 1985 in the maximum security building. I participated in the litigation of Parmigiano versus Garrahy, where the end result was that Judge Patine said that that building was unfit for human habitation and that it must be closed. I was brought back to Rhode Island in 2013 and was shocked to see that it is still open. Right, the only difference in what I see in Max today and what I saw back then is that it is clean. It's as though, the example that I give is you can take an egg, a rotten egg, and as some people tend to do at Easter time, they dye those eggs, they paint them, and they make them look beautiful. We've all seen Easter eggs. They're so appealing. And that's the way maximum security is now. It looks good, but all of the problems from the past that caused it to be unfit for human habitation exist today. If you were a prisoner in maximum security this morning, it is highly likely that at 7 o'clock, frigid air, 20-degree air from outside was blown into your cell on you. This is an everyday practice, 5 and 6 times a day. It's just straight torture. Joe touched upon the mold problem. As you all know, the Rhode Island Housing Act, I can't recall the exact title of it, it states that wherever there's mold in a building, that building is unfit for human habitation. Just a few months ago, in September, there was a school in Warwick, the Sherman Elementary School, I believe it was, where mold was found. They shut it down. No students were allowed to attend that school. Though if they were allowed to attend, they would have been exposed to mold for 5 or 6 hours a day, for tops 5 days a week. But at the ACI, prisoners are exposed to mold 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and if a person is doing 10 years, then he's exposed to that mold for 10 years. Whereas the state law forbids the exposure to mold in housing. But way back in 1977, if you can go read it in the Parmesano decision, or Judge Patini's opinion, mold was one of the issues that he cited. The maximum security building is like an elephant in the room. In this year's budget cycle, not a penny, from what I understand, has been dedicated to doing any renovations or improvement in Max. It was unfit for human habitation 40 years ago, and it's even more so today. It's a common occurrence. If you read in Parmesano, one of the experts who testified said that this was the only prison that he had ever visited in his entire career where officers and, or he said guards, where guards and inmates wear coats at all times in the winter inside the prison because it's cold in there. You can read this. It's in the law book. Right? I think it's 447 Federal Sup, page, 197, I believe is where the case starts. Right? You can go back to the book and read. No, excuse me. That's a different case. It's 443 Federal Sup. But today, if you go in the maximum security building, you will see the guards wearing coats and hats, gloves, sweaters, because it's cold in there, but the prisoners will be in short sleeves. They're not allowed to dress for the cold. And this is just straight torture. Like I was saying, it's the elephant in the room. This committee, or the government in this budget cycle has not devoted a penny to maximum security, when it is the worst of the worst as far as conditions for living at the ACI are concerned. And that's basically what I would like, that's basically what I had to say. This committee and the rest of the legislature, I believe y'all are good people. You just do not know because the Department of Corrections is pulling the wool over your eyes about what actually goes on there, the actual physical conditions. It's torture.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
You're welcome. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. My name is Cherie Cruz. I'm also an appointed member of the Senate Commission to study Justice Reinvestment Proposal and provide recommendations for reducing the incarceration of women here who are incarcerated in Rhode Island. And I just want to extend, we would really like to meet, seeing that this is going on, and discuss with you in the House Finance Committee some of the work being done with the commission to start to help around the women being held at the prison, reducing the population at the prison, as well as supports and programs for the women in the community that could save the state millions. So we really just want to extend that as a member of that committee, extend that and see that there's this work going on in other places within the State House that can really help with the state budget. I did want to point out in listening to Director Coyne's, testimony, currently there's 62 nonviolent and 10% of drug offenses of women incarcerated. So the majority of women who are at that facility are there for nonviolent offenses, are not a public safety risk, or for some type of drug offense. And less than 2% are serving these long-term sentences. And when I say long-term, that's over 2 years. So everyone else is serving majority less than a year there. And 66% are mothers. So I always want to point that out because that's additional cost to the state right? When we talk about DCYF, separating families and the trauma to families in our communities, that's what's happening when we're incarcerating women here in our state, especially for a majority of these types of offenses. Also, I want to address that the director had talked about the programs. Now, mind you, many of these programs, you have to be sentenced for more than 2 years just to get into. So just put that in perspective. There are very few, if any, women who will be able to participate in any of those programs. And if they do, it'll take them many years to complete, if at all. So just keeping that in perspective when you're looking at that budget. So clearly, there's a lot of women, you know, that do not need to be there, a lot of ideas we could discuss about potentially closing the women's facility. Again, there's about 86 women there sentenced, very small number, but again, majority should not be there. Many that have, when they do come out, are facing homelessness, struggling to get housing, behavioral health supports. None of these things they got while inside, but were further traumatized and need it even more so now. So I'm just here to speak about really thinking about that, thinking about reinvestment of taking it from that DOC into the community, really partnering with the commission and looking at ways to do that to save our state money. I mean, one of them was mentioned with the group before. Some of the things looked at, the women's facility now where they're held was originally a maximum security building. So as we work on ways to decarcerate women who should not be there in the first place, we can think of creative solutions like closing down the high cost of high security and all the torturous things you're hearing that have happened there, and start to move into another facility while we're closing another one, and then put that reinvestment back into the community. So again, I just want to thank you for this time, open that invitation, and hope we can work towards really saving our state millions of dollars and really supporting our families and communities. So thank you.
No, thank you, Sherry.
Hi, my name is Crystal Barabee. I was just recently released in the fall, and unfortunately, I'm a recidivist. And the past 17 years, I've been in and out of there, and it's never helped me. It's harmed me. The programs in there now, currently, it's extremely difficult to get into, as well as they're biased in who they choose. The counselors choose who goes in what program. So if you're not liked and you're not a favorite, you don't get into certain programs. That's just the way it is. Funds could be better utilized and allocated in the community as well, because right now I'm facing homelessness due to the fact that there was no support for me when I got out. That's the reason I was a recidivist for so long, because I had nowhere to go every time. It all was encompassed by housing. So, and the horrors I saw when I was in there, this woman bit her tongue off, like partially off, and like, what did they do for them? Nothing. They ended up macing her because she wouldn't look at them when they told her, after she had just gotten back from the hospital. Women diving off the top bunks in the segregation unit trying to commit suicide. That's still happening right now, because I speak to people that are in there, and nothing's being done. Mental health is not supportive whatsoever. There's no counseling. You're lucky if you see somebody twice in 6 months. So the support and the funds need to go to the community to help people, because the women in there are treated horrible, and it doesn't help people. There's no correction at all in it. So,
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Ford.
So I sit here stunned. My name is Pat Ford, by the way. I run an organization called the Coalition Radio Network. Just absolutely stunned. How is it possible that the Department of Corrections, whose director, Patricia Coyne-Fague, who's notoriously both publicity and accountability averse, leave a hearing of the House Finance Committee without a serious conversation about the exploding cost of litigation and the moral outrage that is solitary confinement? They sat here, and I kept waiting for all of you to ask the questions, including a member of this body who I believe was a sponsor of prior legislation to attempt this. And I kept waiting, and and they walked out of here. At what point does the increasing reserve for litigation, which that slide flew through pretty quickly, serve as a call for a significant change in management. You've got credible federal lawsuits targeted against both the management as individuals and the state of Rhode Island for millions of dollars for state-sponsored torture. And yet, here we are at the House Finance Committee, and you would ignore that. At a recent press conference attended by the governor and Dr. James McDonald, the now interim director of the Department of Health, he acknowledged to me that there was no presence by the Rhode Island Department of Health at the Adult Correctional Institute or the Wyatt, and no health inspections. How is that possible? One could argue that if one didn't observe serve-safe regulations at the local deli, you'd be shut down in a heartbeat. Yet, as we've had credible testimony by individuals in this room, that mold conditions that are not safe for anyone in the building, including personnel, continue to exist despite the presence of a consent decree that was filed a generation ago. The state of Rhode Island, I want to make this very clear, is in violation of something called the Mandela Rules, which were promulgated by the United Nations and are called as such in honor, of course, of the great Dr. Mandela and the conditions he had to suffer in South African prisons during apartheid. And there's a variety of them. And I've confronted the head of the DOC about that, and she just chooses to ignore it. We blissfully ignore the fact that the size of the cells are in violation, that the lack of adequate sunlight are in violation, that the amount of medical personnel that necessarily have to be on staff and on a media call are in violation, that the food is in violation, that access to support personnel, whether they be psychiatric or medical, we are in violation. Again, we are a torture state, and all of you sitting here are the architects of that. You know why? Because you are engaged, as we stand right now, in financing this abomination. You're writing the checks. I will tell you this. I will make you my solemn promise. Through my little media organization, I am already working to bring pressure from Archbishop Tobin's office to bear on you to do something. I'm reaching out to organizations like Amnesty International. Now imagine, we associate Amnesty International with the Republic of South Africa. We associate organizations like that with Nazi Germany. But I will tell you that there is torturing happening right now a mere 10 miles from here. And in one of the few opportunities as a legal body, you sat here tonight and did nothing. And that is outrageous. And you should be ashamed of yourself. Because the next time we'll see Patricia Coyne-Fague, there have been few sightings in public, I'll just say that. Do something. Now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford.